So let's go ahead and get started and jump right on in. And a few of the things that we want to cover is, the majority of our sunflowers all of our sunflowers that we will be talking about in this program today will be annual sunflowers. I'm not getting into any of the perennial sunflowers whatsoever. So these are all annuals. So an annual is a plant that we plant in the spring and then it will die come frost. Also, when we plant our annuals, it's really much, much better if we plant them from seed. So direct seeding them directly into the ground, you will have a much stronger stem and a much stronger stalk rather than trying to transplant them. It usually takes, depending on the variety, anywhere from 7 to 14 days for you to see germination with sunflowers. Now, a lot of us like to go ahead and plant early or transplant early because we think that we're going to get a jump start on the planting. So let me pause this for a minute because, wrong button. Okay, so with growing sunflowers, we are kind of talking about days to germination and soil temp. Our soil temperatures need to be about 70 to 75 degrees in order to germinate. So don't run out there on Mother's Day and plant your sunflowers. It's actually much, much better if you can actually wait a week or two or plant them right around Memorial Day weekend. A lot of the times when I have planted sunflowers from transplants as well as direct seeded, I had no head start on my sunflowers whatsoever. It just means I had to take care of a lot of baby plants much earlier. And then my transplants in the ground ended up catching up to the same exact size and blooming at the same time. So realistically, direct seeding your sunflowers is the best way to go. Germination with this, certain varieties of plants need light. Their seed needs light in order to germinate. With sunflowers, you're actually going to give them darkness. So we do need to cover them with soil. And that's why I put that in there, because there are a lot of cut flowers out there that actually prefer to have light rather than darkness on their seeds. Now, sunflowers are full sun. Now, we can't skimp on this. We don't want to put them in part sun. We want a good 8 hours of sun a day. So make sure you find the sunniest location to plant your sunflowers. Also, the heights of all these different sunflowers, I will have specific once we get talking about to the individual sunflowers on their own. But the spacing is going to be the same for all sunflowers. So plant spacing for your sunflower seeds, you're going to want to space them about 4 to 6 inches apart. If that changes, I will specifically note that on the PowerPoint screen, which you will receive a PDF copy of, with saying this is what this spacing be. But consider all spacing for all sunflowers unless specified. You're going to plant those seeds 4 to 6 inches apart. Most of the time, I plant the majority of my sunflowers about 5 inches apart. And again, I direct seed them. A much, much better plant. So we talked about direct seeding them. We want to sow them about a 1/2 inch deep, not an inch, not a 2 inch, only about a 1/2 inch. When you do transplant them, you can put them in like 72 cells, 50 cells. This is you planting on levels of 100. If you do want to transplant, you would want to transplant them 2 to 3 weeks prior to planting. Again, I recommend direct seeding. The plants, the reason that direct seeding is so much better is because they do not like to be transplanted in all reality. Will it work? Absolutely. But the roots prefer not to be disturbed. I've also done sunflowers in little pea pots. That way I did not have to mess with the root system, and then I directly plant the seedlings, the pea pot directly into the ground, and that has also been very successful. Do not pinch plants. A lot of times with seedlings and baby seedlings on flowers especially, and primarily, we tell you to pinch back. That way, because we want them to branch out, we want them to get fuller, we want the plants to get bushier. In this case, no pinching is necessary. Pinch single stem flowers, sunflowers will produce a low quality bloom or no blooms at all. So that will make a big, big difference. So that is why we don't recommend you to pinch. Also, if you are if you're a person who wants sunflowers to continuously grow, or you're growing single stems for cuts, then that is when succession planting would play a part into adding additional sunflowers into your garden. So if you were going to do sunflowers for fresh cuts, then the single stem sunflowers, you're going to want to sow 1 to 2 weeks apart, your different varieties and everything. So it's going to be a constant planting until about July 4th. So your soil requirements, we know that we want worked soil, light, well-drained soil. If there is too much nitrogen, it can cause the plant to grow too vigorously, and then you're going to have abnormal flowers. So the reason I put that in is because I don't want you to go straight to fertilizing these. They actually can go with very minimal fertilizer. Just work your soil, make sure the soil is nice and loose, plant your seed in, give it some water, make sure it's growing in full sun, and don't worry about fertilizing. I mean, very minimal to grow, very easy to grow, very inexpensive to grow. I mean, at most right now, it's just labor and seeds. Your flower size and the stem diameter are controlled by your plant spacing, temperature, soil type, and the day length. So certain flowers are neutral day length, short day length, and that's for other parts of the country. Around here, they will all grow for you. We're gonna talk about single stem versus branching habit sunflowers, what the benefits are of both those type flowers. If you're in it for production, we will also talk about like early and late season production and some varieties there. So when you're growing sunflowers, most people don't realize that there's actually 2 types. You have the single stem type sunflowers, and then you also have the branching type sunflowers. And this is more for your cut flower growers. But I also think even if you want to grow some sunflowers at home just for yourself, that this can be very important. These 2 types are so different from one another because the single stems come up and they only produce 1 bloom. Now, a lot of times that 1 bloom can be, it's like 4 to 6 inches in spread. And sometimes with your branching habit, you're getting multiple flower heads on the same branch, but you're not getting as big of a diameter of a bloom head. So single stem is also preferred like in market varieties, and growers prefer to do branching type habits. So a few things that I liked, I'll tell you a little bit about both. So with single stem varieties, they're really quick, which means you only need about 60 days. So around here, you could get 2 to 3 plantings depending on when our frost is, in order to harvest those heads, in order to use them for cut flowers. Also, single stem plants are more mutable than branching type habits. So that's something to keep in mind. The plants can either be crowded into a 6x6 space to produce a smaller head, or if you want to space them further, the single stems, you'll get a much larger head, like a dinner plate size flower. So the spacing also will play a key part in how big the flower heads would be. Single stems usually have a stronger and much thicker stem, especially to hold the flowers upright. Branching habit ones, the stem is usually a little bit more weaker and you see the flower heads hanging more down to the ground. With single stems, if you're into cut flowers or cutting them in and bringing them into your own house, they have a much longer vase life for you. Their vase life can be, for certain varieties, can be up to 2 weeks in plain water, and that's without any solution. That's just with changing the water frequently. The only downfall is the single stems just produce one flower head. That's it. One flower head and done, and the plant is done. So if this is something that you're just planning to add around your landscape or in the back, going along a fence, you're trying to bring in some birds, we're going to specifically talk about some different varieties in there that might work for you or not work for you as well. With the single stem varieties, this means if you want to keep blooms going from early on all the way through frost, it's going to be succession planting, which means you're going to be planting a couple times out of the year in order to get that continuous bloom. With your branching varieties, they have numerous blooms. And the really cool thing about the branching varieties is the more you cut them and bring them in for your enjoyment, the more they're going to keep producing for you. So branching is probably one of my favorites. And I do grow a lot of branching varieties because I like to be able to get multiple cuts, and I only like one-time planting. Sometimes I don't have the time to do succession plantings, and a lot of the times in midsummer when it's hot in July, I just completely forget. Most of the doubles with blooms, they have more than one layer of petals, are actually branching. So there are some double types, and you'll get multiple bloom heads. The downfall is they're not strong. You don't have very strong stems. So when you put them in a vase, they kind of tilt down. You need to put a lot of foliage in that vase if you do bring them into your home to help hold that bloom upright in there. Your branchings will need much longer to grow. A lot of times they take about 70 to 75 days before they actually start blooming. So, you know, that's almost 10 days longer than your single stems before they will bloom. And also think about intermixing single stems with multi-branching. So if you don't want to do succession plantings, but you're just putting them out there for the birds, the bees, the butterflies, intermingle your seeds together and mix both branching habits in with single blooms. And then that way you can have a wide plethora of blooms, and they will continue for you on into that later fall of the year. A lot of the branching habits, they do recommend that you plant 18 inches apart. I still plant mine about 6 inches apart. And even though I plant them 6 inches apart, I still have the same diameter bloom head is being spaced out 18 inches apart. And that could have been just the luck in the varieties chosen as well. You know, a lot of your branching habits, they do have pollen in them. And that is something else that we are going to have to dig into and talk, because a lot of if you're looking for sunflowers specifically for the pollinators and things like that, the majority of the new varieties of sunflowers that's out there is pollenless. So there's really no beneficial effects for pollinators out there. There's some, but it's very, very minimal. If you're cutting the branching type habits in for a vase, you're only going to get about 5 to 7 days. I usually get about 7 days out of my branching habits with clean water and changing that water on a regular basis. So pollenless versus pollen. One thing you need to do, especially if you're buying your seed packets in a box store or at a nursery, is if pollen is a concern for you and you're looking to plant sunflowers for the pollinators, you need to make sure that you're not buying a pollenless variety. There's more pollenless varieties out there in the market than there is actually pollen. So that could be an issue for you. Some of the reasons that they have developed these pollenless varieties is for the cut flower world, the cut flower people, because a lot of people do not want to put sunflowers on their table and then have all those pollen fall out onto their table. So that is why they've really started hybridizing and reducing that pollen in there. Pollenless sunflowers have not been out all that long. They were actually introduced into the market back in 1988. But it was a purely accidental discovery. To give you a little bit of history on it, it was actually a mutation or a genetic error. And then cut flower growers loved it. So that's when they really, Mother Nature gave them this mutation, and they really started doing the research on that. And if you are growing sunflowers specifically for cutting, then pollenless varieties are perfect. But if you're growing them to feed the wildlife or seeds, keep in mind they don't produce a seed. So there's not going to be anything in there that's harvestable for you or an insect as well, or for the birds, things like that. A lot of our bees will gather both nectar and pollen. So the pollen is a source of protein. They will visit the flower. So even though you have pollenless sunflowers, they will still be there. They will harvest some nectar, but that means they've got to take twice as many trips from the field back to their hive. So some tips when you're harvesting sunflowers for cuts, just for your personal use. You know, if you want to make a bouquet for somebody because that's what you're interested in, you want to make sure that you actually harvest the blooms when they're tight, when you start to first see some of that color, that yellowish orange color. If you do that when they're almost completely open, then what happens is your vase life is actually shortened. And so that is why you want to open them when you've cut them. As soon as you start to see that first sign, if they're still closed, but you see that first sign of color, bring them in. They're going to last the longest. You can also dry sunflowers. So the flowers are completely open and you can hang upside down in a dark, dry area. There is also a product out there called silica gel that you can find in a lot of your craft stores. And what you would do is before the bloom petals die or fall off, you would actually cover them in the silica gel and you let them sit for 2 to 3 weeks. And it basically pulls all the moisture out of the flower head and any part of the stem that you left on. You want to remove all the leaves, and then you can use that as a dried flower. So someone put in the chat box, I want pollen variety. So when I am running through the varieties today, I am very specific on which ones have pollen, which ones don't have pollen, and if they are single stemmed or branching. So hopefully that can help you out. So some people like to harvest sunflowers as edible seeds as well. And you basically want to leave the flower head on the stalk for as long as possible, until almost harvest. So a lot of times it's going to be early fall, mid-fall before you're going to cut that bloom, and the bloom's going to hang upside down and there's not going to be any petals left. You may start to see some birds and everything digging into that flower head, and if that becomes an issue, then you may want to go ahead and cut it, bring it inside, and let it continue to dry inside, because birds and everything will begin to pick that out as it gets closer to fall. You can also wrap the head with a layer of cheesecloth while it is still attached to the stalk as a deterrent for the birds to come up and eat, but still allow it to dry on the stem as well. Paper bags is also another option. If paper bags are really good, if you want to leave it on and actually wait for them to catch the seeds. Sometimes, you know, if you're if you're getting those big, huge sunflowers, a lot of times you're growing the Mammoth sunflowers, the huge and the tall ones for your edible seeds. And if that's the case, you're basically going to have to use grocery size brown paper bags. But in the fall of the year, if there's any moisture, if there's any dew, you don't want those seeds to sit inside those bags because they will begin to mold. So a lot of times I'd recommend to people to just cut them off the stalk, bring them in a garage or a basement, let them continue to dry, and then remove the seeds out. So you can also save some of the seeds from the edible ones so that you can replant next year. Now remember, from the pollenless sunflowers, you're not going to want to save any of the seeds. It's a sunflower that you're going to have to buy the seeds year after year after year to put into your garden. But the ones that do have pollen, you can do some seed saving in the fall. Once the seeds have dried out, there's no moisture in them. You can store them in a glass jar, a baby food container, and then replant those seeds next spring. If you want to, you can also harvest the heads and then use that to create your own bird food and things like that. So I'm not going to go through this. I just put this in because I thought it was really kind of cool. But this is just tells you how to, once you've harvested them, how you would go about roasting them or adding flavors. So like there's a cinnamon flavor sunflower seed. You can add that if you want to make them pumpkin spice. If you want to try a dry barbecue rub, you can follow this information here and I'll tell you how to do this. So most of the time when you direct seed your sunflowers, their stalks are big enough, like you can see in this picture right here, that they don't need any netting. Now, over on the right here, I know there's not sunflowers in here, they're snapdragons, but this is a netting called Horta netting. So this is a netting that you can get through like Johnny Select Seed, you can get it through A.M. Leonard. I think they have it as cut flower netting on Amazon. You got to play with the words a little bit. But with a lot of my sunflowers, if they're out in an open field and there is no protection, I add this netting. So this will help. This netting is for cut flowers, and this allows your cut flowers to grow straight stems. Now, what this tall as cut flowers get, the sunflowers get, sometimes I double layer them because if we have a huge windstorm around here, which we can have with some of our summer storms or late fall storms, we will see our corn lay down. If we have enough wind that makes our corn lay down, we will have enough wind that can take our sunflower stalks down. So keep that in mind. And that is why I just added this netting in here as an option. If something like if you're in a really windy area and you don't want your sunflowers to blow over, I would suggest doing this netting. You can just hold it up with tobacco sticks, any kind of poles, and then you just put the netting tight around the poles and stretch it for as long as your bed is, or for as long as your sunflower row may be. Now, when I grow sunflowers, you know, my rows are about 45 feet long. They are 3 to 4 foot wide. Usually I can only grow about 2.5 rows of sunflowers. I make sure that I have a full row of branching type habits, and then I leave the other row and a half for my single stems because I have to do succession plantings. So with this, you also want to make sure that you kind of keep the weeds from down and reduced. But if they're in a landscape bed, you know, you may want to think about some more dwarf variety of sunflowers. And with these dwarf varieties of sunflowers, you're not going to need that netting. That netting is mostly for the tall and the extremely tall sunflowers. But with dwarf sunflowers, they're great for planting in containers. They're a great border plant in your landscape. These will continue to bloom. They're not like the single stemmed, so they're going to have multi-branches on them to keep sending out multiple blooms. With your dwarf sunflowers, the more you deadhead these, the more blooms you will have. If you put them in the ground, they will grow taller than they will grow in a pot. So when they're growing in a container garden, they can get anywhere from 6 to 42 inches high, depending on how big your container is. So I would say in a container, a good 6 to 12, 18 inches max is what the height of that plant is going to get. It just depends on the variety. And we're going to introduce you to some of these varieties here that would work. So these next set of varieties, these dwarf sunflowers, are what's going to be best for you in containers, as well as a border plant or in your landscape. This one is called Sunny Smile. And with this being in the landscape, you can still use this for a cut flower without having the continuous height. The blooms will get about 3 to 6 inches wide, so they're going to look like the traditional sunflower that makes everybody happy. They're really, really popular in order to grow. In a container, they're going to get about 10 to 15 inches. In your garden, they're going to get about 22 feet tall. They do have pollen, and it only takes them about 50 to 60 days to mature. So, you know, knowing their pollen, knowing their branching habits, and from the day you direct seed, you're going to know. So even though you may be planting these Memorial Day, expect blooms to appear, being we're direct seeding, right around July 4th is what we usually guesstimate about. This next one is has a little bit of orangish red rust colors in it, not traditional yellow. This is a pollenless one that is dwarf. It has multi-branches, so it's going to keep blooming for you. But it does have a nice big bloom for 4 to 6 inches, and it's a bicolored with those multicolors. So that's the attractant to it, is the dwarf. Then you have the teddy pear, and this is one that you would call a double. So this is one that you can grow in a field or you can grow in a container. This is one that you can also find a lot in the box store seed area, as well as your local nursery's seed area. The final height is always going to depend on the location of planting. This is a very early double blooming sunflower, which is about 60 to 75 days. The downfall to this double is that it has very little pollen in it. It has some, but there is very little pollen. But they do have the shaggy type bloom. The next dwarf is Sunny Smile. It is in the same family as the first one that we talked about, but this is the true miniature. So if you go to a box store or a local nursery and they have sunflowers in containers that's already been planted, this is probably the one that you are seeing. Great for container use as well as garden use. In the past, you didn't find a lot of your sunflowers at the local nurseries because they grew too large. But now that they are starting to develop these dwarf sunflowers, greenhouse growers can actually grow them in the greenhouse for you guys to already have transplants in order to plant into your containers and landscape. They do have more of a golden orange to their petals, and the blooms will be anywhere from 2 to 5 inches. Again, deadheading is a must, especially in the branching type habits. They can go into a container as small as 6 inches and be grown. So even if you do find some seed for these and you want to grow some containers on, the container just needs to be 6 inches or larger as well. Depending on where it's being grown, it's only going to get about 20 inches high total. This is a pollenless variety, so it's not going to be good for those pollinators, but it's a very early blooming one at 50 to 60 days. The next one is Burt. This is also, Burt could be another one that you find on the nursery greenhouse shelves. It has the bright yellow petals on there. It is a pollenless variety. The difference with Burt is it takes about 70 days to mature. So it takes a little bit longer, but much shorter in height as well, with exceeding up to 18 inches. The next one is Sunbuzz. Beautiful sunflower, holds its heads up really good, branching habit, but it is also pollenless. Keep that in mind. This one's called Rio Carnival. This has a more tintage of red in the center of it rather than the rust in the oranges. It is a branching one and it is pollenless, but it will be ready to go in about 55 days or so. It is a very compact plant. The petals look more like teardrops on them. It's a great pot production sunflower as well. So you may find some of these in the nurseries. So as a disclosure, once we get into the tall sunflowers, because that's all that we really have for dwarfs out there on the market, there could be a few other varieties that I have not mentioned. A lot of the varieties that I have mentioned in here today can be found in Johnny's Select Seeds, Harris Seeds, and I also tried to get one that we could find locally, purchase seeds in our box stores and nurseries as well. Your tall sunflowers, once you get in here, they all start to look the same. They all have the same habits. What we're worried about most, again, is the pollenless versus branching. I will also mention their heights because some of these in here, like this strawberry blonde, gets 60 to 72 inches in height. It is a pollenless branching. Now, this is one that I grew last year, and this one was absolutely outstanding. I love how the outside was a much lighter color and kind of faded in to mauves. It wasn't really red. Sometimes I would get some burgundy colors in there, but it was different shades of mauves and pinks and things like that. This one, we are talking about tall sunflowers, and these are edible. So one thing that I was able to learn, especially for the strawberry blonde, that the flower buds can be fried and petals can be used as garnished in salads and desserts. The flavor is bittersweet. Now, I have personally not have tried to fry flower buds or use them as a garnish in salads. One thing I do need to tell you is if you think that there has been any pesticides or any chemicals near any of these, you do not want to harvest the flower buds or the salads. And also try to put your sunflowers, even if you're collecting the seeds, not only for you and animals, in an area where there may not be any sprays, chemicals, lawn chemicals and things like that could drift over to the plant. This is another one that is an edible flower. Even though these are edible flowers, they can also be grown as cuts or just for your enjoyment on its own. But this is a really pretty fall color. It comes more in the fall. It takes a little bit longer for it to mature. So you're getting this more in like the end of August, September before it gets to start blooming. This was also an American All-American Selection winner, which means they have used these in greenhouses and all of that. This has very minimal pollen, but its height is much shorter compared to a lot being at 40 to 50 inches. The next one is the strawberry lemonade mix. Very similar to the strawberry blonde, except in this mix, you've got light yellows and more of the strawberry mauves, but mauves with also the yellow mixed in these creamy yellows in here, wine reds, pink combinations. They're great for cut flowers. Great to put along a fence to add multiple different colors because they are branching and they do produce very little pollen, but these flower buds can also be eaten from these varieties. Now this one is called Holiday. This one is another bright sunny yellow, but this is one that it does bear pollen. It's extremely good for the bees. So if you need to forage for the bees, looking to collect seed, Holiday would be a good one to collect seed from. And it's also a great branching habit as well. It's very classic sunflower. The other one is called Autumn Beauty. Now this seed is very easy to find out on the box store shelves, your local nurseries. This one also has pollen, great for the bees. produces nice long stems, comes in a wide range of colors, branching habit. But on this one, I would suggest some sort of netting, some sort of trellising, because it gets 96 inches to 120 inches tall. Now, this is one that comes on more towards the end of August when I plant these right around Memorial Day. But this is an excellent, great later branching sunflower and very easy to find. Now, this is our tall sunflowers. This sunflower is high yielding. This is one that you're going to be using for bird seed, or you're collecting the seed in order to harvest for yourself. They are a single stem, which means they're not branching, but you're only going to plant the royal sunflower once. You're not going to do succession planting, being you are collecting the seed as an edible. The seeds also have that gray striped to them, so that's something else to keep in mind. Your sunflower should start blooming in about 68 to 71 days, and then at about 100 to 110 days is where you would actually collect the heads and collect the seed. So someone mentioned, it says, do seed packets tell if pollen or not, branching or single stem? Some do, some don't. So, you know, I would use this PowerPoint as a reference. And also, if you're really going to get into sunflowers, I would think more highly about doing your research before you go out to the store shelves and purchasing it, or purchasing your seeds online, because your online companies are more apt to tell you this in the description than the actual seed packs. Some, like I said, some do and some don't. So you just really have to watch that. So this is your American Giant. So this one is sold at the dollar store, all your box stores, all your nurseries. This is a very popular one. This is the one that the seed packet that all the kids want to purchase if they picked out a sunflower seed, because this is a very tall plant, 96 to 120 inches. Now, it does have pollen, and they're only single stem plants, so you're only going to get one head per plant. It can range anywhere from 60 to 85 days to maturity. So I would say you're probably blooming at about 60 days, 70 days. And again, you're probably going to be harvesting the head at about 110 to 120 on this. Super, super tall, probably one of the tallest out there. If you have the nice, strong stalks, you know, you can see that you don't need the netting, but if we do get one of those windstorms or you're in a windy area, I would consider that. But this is the one that all the kids, this is going to give you the giant type. This is also going to give you the produces the most seeds for you as well. This is very similar to the last one we just talked about. This is the Mammoth, the big heads, the single stalks. These are the ones that are going to overpower you in height with being like 8, 10. We've even had some of these come in at 12 feet in height out at the fair. But they're your big traditional. The Mammoth is another one out there that is extremely easy to find anywhere where you go shopping. It is a single stem. At about 75 days, it's going to start the blooming. And at about 110 to 120 is when you're going to begin the harvesting. Now, if you were into a market farmer and you wanted to sell, you know, seed heads, sunflower heads, because at some markets, not necessarily around here, but in other states, farmers will grow these seed heads and they will lay them on the market tables for people to take them home, collect seeds out of it, and then eat the seeds themselves. So now we're getting more into the cut flower production of sunflowers. And even though you may not be doing cut flower production, it's still good to know which ones are pollenless and which ones are single or branching. So I'm very specific. The next set that we're going to talk about are all pollenless and single stem, which means succession planting. If you want to keep blooms going through frost, you're going to at least need to do 2 plantings. This one is called Copper Queen. It's going to be pollen free. It's great. Great for cutting. It's actually probably one of the popular ones that you would see out there in the market shelves, or you'd find at the box stores or Kroger when you walk by their flower shops. This is probably one of the ones you see the most. It will get tall at 60 to 72 inches, but it only takes about 55 to 65 days before you can start harvesting the blooms from them. So this one's called Daphne. This one is good for backyard use. This one is also good if you were on a large scale production. It has a beautiful, very sturdy bloom of about 5 to 8 inches. It is pollen free, but the petals will overlap for you. And that is kind of the traditional sunflower look. And it gives you the traditional sequence look with the seeds as well. Before they dry. This also has an excellent vase life. So if it's something that you want to cut and bring into your home, amazing vase life. This one is newer, and this one is called a double quick orange. It doesn't look like your traditional sunflower, but it is considered a double. It is that bright, bright gold. And in a lot of the trial gardens, this has become a new favorite amongst a lot of people. And it only gets about 48 to 60 inches tall. This one is Helios Flame. And what the Helios Flame is, you've got that big, huge, nice center. And you've got the red and the yellows and a little bit of the rust colors going on in there. An excellent sturdy stem for you. They actually call that a mahogany ring, but it's only 45 days out. So you could definitely get 2 to 3 succession plantings from the Helios Flame. The next one is Vincent's Choice. This is actually a more of a smaller bloom. It doesn't have that big, huge center like a lot of our traditionals do. It has a different appearance, but what's nice about this one is you probably would not have to stake this one or net this one. It has a very, very sturdy form and a very sturdy head. This one is Zohar. They also for Zohar sell USDA certified organic seeds. So if they mentioned where I got my research from that they are certified organic seeds that you would be planting, I tried to note that as well. But this is a very early sunflower, sturdy seeds, very uniform looking. And there are a lot of tall sunflowers that are pollenless and single stem. So this is a newer series that has been out for about 4 or 5 years. We have actually grown these out at our nature center one year. And, you know, the picture does not do them justice. They're not your traditional, they're a very novel type sunflower. But if you want to grow something different, something really unique, something that stands out, these are really, really cool to do. They look very medieval-ish. But we cut them and we took them to a local nursing home, and the people fell in love with them because they were just so different and non-traditional. One of the big breeders of sunflowers is Tom Heaton. So sometimes you'll read some of these descriptions and you'll see his name because he is one of the big breeders of all of these new pollenless sunflowers. Now this is, instead of being purple filled, this is green filled. When you're looking it out in the field or in your garden, there is no show. The only way that this sunflower is going to stand out to you is if you are completely cutting it and adding it into a vase with other flowers to make it stand out on itself. Otherwise, in your garden, it looks like you have just a bunch of green plants with very little color. So if this is something that you want to try because you like the uniqueness and things like that, I would definitely mix your seeds up and plant these amongst them to help them really stand out and really give them the show that it deserves. So this is a premier series. So when they find some sort of sunflower that's pollenless and single stem for cut flowers, they run with it. And once we get to with some of these series, because people will fall in love with it. With the Premier series, it's very black center and it has a velvety look for it. And that is what is attractive to the cut flower people. But it has these creamy yellow flowers on them. And then also in the Premier series is this Premier Orange. They also still continue with that very velvety black looking centers, just different color petals on the outside. Single stem again, but the Premier series is coming on at 45 days. So when they are breeding this, it is like a run to the races to see how fast and how early these flowers can come to maturity for the cut flower growers in the markets out there. Then you have lemon. So it's more of a obviously a lemon color with that black velvet center. Then we're going to go into the Sun series. So like I said, once they start a series, they run with it. Now, Sunbright is one that you can actually find a lot of seed packets out there in all of our box stores, nurseries, and everything. So this is a very easy seed packet that you can look for. Excellent. I have grown this for years upon years. It is pollenless and single stem. They do hold upright. Mine each time were more towards the 60 inches in height rather than the 72 inches in height. Now, sometimes on the Sunbright series, the original one, I would get some side shoots after the first cut, but most of the time they're one and done. And this is the Sunbright. You can see that the petals, I know they just cut them, but they haven't fully opened. The petals are much, much shorter and the centers are much, much bigger and darker. And that is their main feature to the Sunbright, is it has a darker center rather than more color on the outside. They also will bloom under shorter days. So with succession planting, as the fall comes and our daylight changes, these will continue to go in the fall of the year. So that is why, but we're back to 70 to 80 days for maturity. Now this is the Full Sun Improved. This is one that only has a 4 to 6 inch bloom. It has the classic sunflower look. There's really not much difference compared to a lot of the other ones that we have discussed compared to this one. This one is grown more in the south for production because it can handle the warmer temperatures over a longer period of time. So the next one is a Sunrich series. And with the Sunrich series, this is Sunrich Summer Providence. This is very new, recently came out on the market. I have not actually grown this one, but they're supposed to have upward facing blooms. And that makes a big, huge deal when it comes to the cut flowers. And also they're looking for sunflowers that have uniform blooms. So that is why upward facing and uniform is a big deal in the cut flower world. You also have Sunrich Orange, and that's about 2 to 3 days earlier than the Summer Province in weeks, but it's only about 48 inches tall. So this is relatively small and about 50 days till you get your first bloom. You've got the Sunrich Gold, and in here, same thing. It's very early, ideal for cut flowers. You can see the discs in the center have a yellow and a green tint rather than a dark and a black and a brown tint. This is the Sunrich Orange. This is probably one of the earlier blooming ones at about 50 days. A good traditional look at about 4 to 6 inch bloom. You have the Lime. The reason they call it a lime is because the green insides here has those lemon yellow disc surrounded by a lime disc. Same size bloom in about 60 days to maturity. Now this is a Sunrich Orange that we mentioned earlier. We will talk about the ProCut series, and this is a great succession in with the ProCut series because of the amount of days it takes. But it's ready 10 to 14 days earlier than most everything else in the Sunrich family. And then also they have a lemon, Sunrich Lemon. So like I said, when they run with a variety, they run until they can get almost every single color conquered. This is another one. And you look at this one and you say, okay, what's the difference between the lemon and what's the difference between this one? And it's the discs on the inner side. This has a darker disc. The other one was yellow and green. Just depends on what you want to look for. This one is also really good in the Sunrich series is for people who would grow in high tunnels to start early on or to have a crop coming later up in the fall of the year. So now we're going to get into ProCut series. So we're still talking about single stems and pollenless. With these single stems and pollenless, the ProCut series has every single color covered. So with the ProCut series, a lot of them, if they have DMR behind the name. So if you're looking through your catalogs and you're looking at different sunflowers, whether it's a ProCut series or anything else, what does DMR mean? DMR means downy mildew resistance, and this one has improved appearance. So downy mildew is kind of like what would be like a cosmetic effect you'll see in the leaves, especially when you have plants really close together and there's a lack of air circulation. It kind of reminds you of this, it'll get this white powder on the leaves. Also, that has to do with moisture. So if you know that you've got an issue or you're putting this by your vegetable garden that has plants that get downy mildew, like squash, different cucurbits will get downy mildew. You may want to look for varieties that have DMR if you're planting these around a vegetable garden. They also have ProCut White Night. This one is an absolute beaut. I have grown this for a handful of years. One thing to note when you're looking at light color petals, especially on sunflowers, with light color petals, excuse me, the more susceptible to damage by insect feeding. So to avoid insect damage, so it will be other insects, we encourage you harvest the bloom just as it begins to open and storing. So if you're just planting different sunflowers out back for your enjoyment in your landscape along a fence or something like that, unless you're trying to bring in the good and the bad insects, I would stay away from the whites and some of the lemon colors because you could be bringing in all kinds of other insects, which is a good thing. The next one is ProCut Orange. Looks very similar to a lot of the other sunflowers we looked at. ProCut also has a ProCut Red. It's a very deep, it's a very burgundy red. It's a beautiful one. So if you want some sort of red color in there, this is an amazing red to grow. You have Plum. Plum is new to the ProCut series. This is a new recent addition. Kind of reminds you of like the Strawberry Blonde series that we've kind of talked about earlier. This one is a white light. So they had White Night first in the ProCut series, and then they have recently just come out with the White Light. So it has a smaller center and more wider petals rather than white creamy petals. You've got the bicolor with the mahogany in there. You also have the lemon lighter yellow to it. You also have the Horizon, which is more of a smaller uniform bloom, kind of remind you of Vincent's Choice, very similar to that one. Excellent one to grow. You have Orange Excel. The reason that this one is completely different is traditional, but you've got the dark centers in here. You've got ProCut Orange with the DMR. So this specific variety right here is resistance to downy mildew resistant. So again, if you want yellow and you want orange in a place where you may be growing in with your crops, you may want to consider that. Now, some sunflowers, they do get different kinds of mildews, powdery mildews and stuff on their leaves. I consider that cosmetic damage. I would not want to worry about spraying because for one, you don't want to be spraying, especially if you're trying to bring in pollinators. So sunflowers are very easily grown. They don't need much fertilizer. They just need well-drained soil, a little bit of water here and there, and also, a lot of sunlight. This one is called a red/lemon bicolor. This is another one that is recently new to the ProCut series. This one is Brilliance. This is on large scale production. They like to use these for retail markets and things like that. So you could be getting some Pro Mix if you buy your sunflowers at a store or at a florist as well. You've got the ProCut Gold, which is a very, very rich gold. And next we're going to go to, we've got Pollenless but branching. So we've already gone through all the tile sunflowers that are pollenless and single stem. Now we've got pollenless and branching. So this one is called Starburst, and Starburst is new to the market because we've got more like single and double type blooms mixed in here. So we call them semi-double flowers. They're also early blooming at about 60 days. I think we could see it around 55 days as well. What's nice about this is they are tall, they are branching, and they also have resistance to downy mildew. This one is called Buttercream. So remember what I said about the white knights and the insect damage? I have grown, there's one called Vanilla Ice, and I do get a lot more insect damage of multiple different insects feeding on the blooms of my light ones. This one is called Gold Rush. This is another one that's really easy to find out there in the box stores, the seeds and everything like that. Great branching, but it is pollenless. This one is called Starburst Lemon Aurora. Starburst does have a whole series. I forgot to put them all together in this PowerPoint. But they do have that semi-double series out there of multiple different colors with the downy mildew resistance built in. This one is Soraya. This is probably one of the biggest, the sturdier stems, probably one that you would not even need to net or anything like this. This was also the first sunflower to get an All-American Selections award. They can be great for greenhouse production, field production, great in the landscape. It does have some pollen, but very minimal. And it does take about 85 to 95 days. With a lot of the farmer, fresh cut flower farmer growers, this is probably one of their top sunflowers they grow for cuts to bring into their house or bring in to sell. So you can yield multiple stems off of this plant, and that's why they really like this. This one is called a Goldie Double, and with the Goldie Double, it is a full double. So it's kind of reminds you of like the teddy bear, except it gets much, much taller here. Minimal pollen, and it also has branching. You can also purchase this one with USDA certified organic seeds as well. This is Rouge Royale. So there used to be one out there called Moulin Rouge, but for trademark reasons, they had to change its name. So I have some old sunflower packets that I do have the same Moulin Rouge, and it's the same exact sunflower here. But I do like to grow this one as a branching, but they can be so dark, very dark, like burgundy, chocolate color almost. But this is a great, great branching sunflower. This one's called Lemonade. This is another fully double. Produces many, many stems, minimal pollen, but a lot of branching. Red Hedge. I've also grown this one. This one has a smaller flower to it. It's very, very sturdy. It holds itself up very nicely in the field as well as in the vase. And it is extremely dark, really, really dark. So I usually put other cut flowers that's light around it. This one is called Jade. This is a great branching one. And what I like about Jade is that it can get about 36 inches tall to 48 inches tall. So it's a little bit on the smaller side, but it is branching habit and it does come on early. The branches are very vigorous, but this is an excellent one to grow for multi-stems in the landscape. This one's called Starburst Panache. And this has also got the double, it's got the orange. We've got Chocolate. This is a dark with the yellow tips on it. It does have an abundance of flowers per stem. I have grown this one. It does very well in the landscape beds. This one is called Monet's Palette. So you can see that it looks like it has some semi-double as well as our regular traditional colors. It also has a strawberry blonde red bicolors in the mix as well. This one is called Infrared. And so with infrared, you're just getting different shades of red to rust to oranges in this mix. So now here are we got tall pollen single stem sunflowers. And guess what? There are none. So I'm going to go back. I have not found any for this program out of the research that I've done. I'm not saying that they're not out there, but I did not find any pollen single stem. So the majority of your pollen sunflowers, besides the edible ones that we talked earlier, some of those edible ones did have pollen and they were single stemmed, but for like the landscape and enjoying and for the birds and the bees, they're going to be branching habit. So this is what you want. If you're here looking for sunflowers for the insects, this is what you want. This one is called Chocolate. So this one is a red. It is that really dark burgundy color. Does great. It only can get about 48 inches tall. Mine got around 50 closer, but it does bear pollen and it is great for the bees. The next one is Florenza. And Florenza, for a pollen cut flower, this is probably one of the top on most of the farmer flower growers list is Florenza. They really like the different combinations of different flowers that you can get on the stems. They're very manageable in height with being 45 to 55 inches tall. And it does have that pollen for you. This one is Sonia. This is another one that is very popular with the market flower farmers. It's a great cut flower. It has a really long vase life. What I also like about this is it only gets 38 to 42 inches tall. So this would be a great one to add into the landscape. And usually you can get sprays of 8 or more side branches per stem. So the more you cut, the more side branches that you will get. And the more it will keep, and the longer your flowers will keep producing for you. If you do not cut them, the flower heads are just going to dry up, curl over, and then you can let the birds and the other insects enjoy. Valentine. Valentine is another great branching habit. I have grown this one for many, many years. It is more lighter colored. So sometimes I do have some insect damage on a handful of these blooms, but it will take them about 75 to 80 days. But they do have pollen, but I really haven't noticed a lot of pollen fall on my table or anything like that. So I do recommend this one as well.